Welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and my guest today. He's back. It's Greg Bogart. Hello, Greg.
Hello.
Well, it's lovely to have you back because having discovered one of your books, I then discovered another. And in fact, I had forgotten that this has been on my shelves for a few years.
Wow.
And it is Planets in Therapy. So it was nice to go back and to read it again. And I think there is what I really like is I like the approach that you take with astrology, which is very, very rooted in spirituality and also about helping us to evolve. So it's about developing the consciousness and evolving. And I'm thinking in particular, there were a few quotes actually in the preface, which I really liked. And the first one is the birth chart needs conscious involvement to unfold. So tell us a little bit about what you mean by that, because I really like that.
Well, what I mean by that is just studying the chart as if things are just going to happen to us isn't terribly productive. So when we have a Saturn transit, it isn't just a matter of, oh, what is Saturn going to do to me? It's a question of where am I focusing? How can I invest myself in working on a particular issue? Then something happens. Then we see progress and forward movement in life. And so it's in that sense that I say our conscious involvement determines the outcome. Astrological symbols can manifest on different levels. So if we have some Mars activity, yes, there can be stresses, little interpersonal disagreements, or we can energize our activity in a particular way. We can exert ourselves, and Mars becomes a part of us rather than something that happens to us.
See, I like that because we could look at transits and we could say they're teaching us something, which is absolutely right and true. But we could also, in addition to that, say, how can I work with this energy, perhaps in some way embody this energy so that I'm working with it?
Yes. I like to think of the chart as a set of instructions. It's pointing us in the direction of certain courses of action, certain attitudinal changes.
I think what I remember, what came to mind was I remember once, many years ago, I was wanting to plot my way through a particular part of my life. And I was standing in my lounge thinking, if only I had a map, if only I had a map that would show me the way, because I feel completely lost. And then a little voice in my head went, well, you're an astrologer. You do have a map. Have a look at your map. See where you're going. And I think that was a really nice thing, is that it's very true that we have this beautiful set of instructions, as you put it. I can call it a map, that guides us as to where we are at in this particular phase of development, and then opens up the possibilities for what's next. So how do you work with prediction?
How do I work with prediction? Well, I think about what wants to happen. What is the universe trying to bring about? So if a Pluto transit is going through my fourth house, what kinds of getting rid of things wants to happen? What kind of turning over the soil wants to happen? What kind of regeneration of the environment wants to happen? By the way, I'm terribly sorry. There's a lot of background noise on the street all of a sudden. So I hope that's not coming through too bad. So I think of anticipation when I think of astrological prediction. I think of anticipating the direction things are trying to move. And then I want to go with that. I want to move and turn in that direction rather than resist change. So I'm cooperating with the way the universe is organized at this moment as it is affecting my birth structure. And what I think is we get more familiar with our own astrological pattern and traits, and we develop some consistency in who we are and what our objectives are. And so we direct ourselves toward actualizing what is indicated in our chart, not trying to be someone we're not trying to be somewhere where we're not trying to have an experience that isn't happening, but to be fully awake and embrace the experience that is happening. So, for example, if there's not a lot of activity at the midheaven in the career zone and things are in a quiet phase, we can have an acceptance of that rather than wishing we were in the limelight, wishing we were at the peak of success. So astrological knowledge helps us affirm the beauty of this moment, the beauty of this phase of evolution, and an understanding of what steps I need to take now that's in line with my schedule, my birth structure, my current transiting energies. And then we feel aligned, we feel in harmony, and that generates contentment, a certain happiness to be alive, to be where we are.
So that's easy to understand in the context of, let's say, conjunctions, even trines. But inherent in a square and an opposition is tension. So how do you approach that tension?
Well, first of all, I'm less inclined to attribute those kind of meanings to particular aspects. I'm more interested in the planetary pairs that are trying to meet and blend and merge. So some planetary pairs tend to generate more conflict intrinsically during any of their aspects. But going to your question, we have to deal with stress and conflict. We have to deal with the tension of opposites being pulled in different directions, how to live the totality of our being and of all that is happening. So we have to hold the different ends of the continuum. Maybe there's a stress between the 4th house and the 7th house. Maybe there's a stress between our family of origin and our spouse. Maybe people don't get along as well as we would like. Or maybe there's a disagreement about domestic, how to organize the home, how to live in the home in the 4th house. So we try to understand what are the different factors, the different planetary energies that are trying to be lived and how to reconcile them. So definitely astrology is not going to make us pretend there's no stress in life, that there's no conflict, but it helps us understand the nature of that conflict. So recently I spoke to a woman who was having a lot of stress to her natal Mars in the 5th house. She was having a lot of discord with her son, her 50-year-old son. And sometimes the planets tell us, yeah, this just is, we can't just pretend that everything is fine. No, this relationship is stressed for these reasons. And we live that. We have to live the painful parts at times. And if the body is inflamed during transits to Mars, we have to deal with that inflamed condition, or that emotionally inflamed situation, and discern how to direct the energy, what needs to be said so that the anger subsides, is discharged. So again, I'm not so much going to say a square brings conflict. It really depends what the planets are. Jupiter square Venus has a different implication than Pluto square Mars. So it's not just the aspect; it's the planetary energies and how they mix.
Exactly.
Some of them have they're a volatile mix, like Mars, Uranus, something like that.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And the way that I always look at it is, you've got two sets of energy. You've got a set of energies, two different energies. Some of it is going to work well. I think of conjunctions, when I'm teaching, I always say, well, it all depends on who's sitting next to you. You could be at a dinner party and get along very well with the person sitting next to you, or you might wish somebody had changed the seating arrangement. It's just, that's the way it is. Conjunctions, some planets blend more easily with others. On the other hand, with the squares and the oppositions, there is a tension. So what is the nature of the tension? Because ultimately, I feel that the aim is to integrate and harmonize. And if we are looking at the energies and thinking about what they represent, and we see where there is tension, we can think, well, how do we harmonize? And sometimes the harmonizing is actually just accepting that the tension exists, instead of going against the grain and saying, well, perhaps I can I can change this person, or I can change this situation. We can't. We're not all powerful. We can't do that. It's not always up to us to change everything. And part of the conflict we're feeling is coming to acceptance. So it's a very nuanced way of working. But then again, life is very nuanced.
Indeed.
So
I guess a key point that you were alluding to earlier is that in my approach to therapeutic astrology, our goal is to not look at what's happening only in terms of predicting events and predicting what's going to happen, but to think about developmental tasks and stages, to look at the chart as presenting a series of chores, challenges, tasks, things to accomplish, things to master, and a path of self-development. And that raises up the power of astrology to bring about character transformation. And with that, everything looks different. And so this book is intended to convey that perspective and how to work with various challenges, like along Pluto transit, along Neptune transit.
I feel, looking at your book and reading it, that this is it's like a cross between a manual and a historical account of the understanding of astrology, psychological astrology. So it's a very comprehensive look at it. And particularly as well, because you also include an area on synastry. Tell us a little bit about your approach with synastry.
Well, the first thing is I focus on the individual charts. Before I do composite charts and before I do synastry, I look at what is happening for this person's chart. And I do that often in the presence of the spouse, the other person, the other party, so they can understand what is this other person going through right now. And I do that in both directions for both people before I put one person's chart on top of the other. That's the way I generally approach it. And it is with the attitude that there's no perfect relationship that's completely harmonious and free of stress. That just doesn't seem to happen very often. And so it's a matter of understanding the ways that we're different, understand how I'm organized differently from you. I don't have to be like you. And that generates tolerance, a sense of humor, a realization that relationships tend to bring a meeting of opposites. It's the opposites that attract. So commonly couples struggle because one person can't accept the different orientation or different habits or different interests of the person they love. And I think having an understanding of who this person is, who they need to be, what they need to do, helps us accept them. So the Hawaiian Huna teachings say to love is to be happy with. And so in my approach to synastry, we try to learn to be happy with each other rather than constantly critical and contemptuous of who they are. Now, there are, of course, deal breakers, things that we can't put up with. And so we come to an understanding of whether a trait in another person is a chronic pattern that cannot be changed, or whether there's some leeway, some openness to change. So anyway, that's definitely an important topic in the book, Synastry and Conscious Relationships. And just haven't looked at this chapter for a while, but I try and bring some understanding to planets in the 7th house and natal planets or transiting planets and how that changes the character of relationships. So you may have a very happy, harmonious relationship or marriage, and then Pluto transits into your 7th house and the whole atmosphere changes. The whole character of the relationship seems to shift. So we come to an understanding, yeah, there's different seasons in a relationship. And what does that call forth? What kind of confrontation with the shadow do we need to engage in? So I look at the Jungian typology in terms of synastry and trying to understand different typological emphases and how a spouse tends to bring out our inferior function. Are you still with me, Annabelle? Appears that the call was dropped. So the sun is a very important factor in synastry, trying to understand where the sun of one person's chart falls in the other person's chart tends to be a pretty significant factor. I look at Mercury in terms of the different, how each person communicates, and Venus in terms of the different tastes of the two partners. Annabelle, are you?
I'm here.
I think I lost you for a while.
You did. I don't know what happened. I'm looking at my Wi-Fi and I have absolutely no idea what's going on. There's some sort of silly privacy warning that's just appeared.
Somehow during the break, the noise outside my door stopped, hopefully for good. I have to say that has been a bit distracting, having this
Well, I
grinding
could
truck
hear it,
noise.
which was good. I couldn't hear it, which was
So
good. But
are we continuing the same recording,
yeah,
or are we going to?
I believe we are. I have, in the space of 8 months, this has happened to me once, and it recorded both halves. So, so I'm assuming it will do both. Um, I'm trying to see whether it's appeared yet, but not yet. No. Okay, right. Anyway, so what I like, I'll just give you a moment. I like the fact that you say that you begin by looking at the individual charts, and I do that as well. And actually, you were talking about humor. It's one of my favorite things to do with when a couple first comes and asks for synastry work, um, because it's almost like a little light bulb goes on where they're seeing something from the other person's perspective, things that they hadn't seen before. And that was always very exciting. Um, it's something silly. I find, for instance, Mercury squares in charts to be causes of minor irritations, which build and build and build, or oppositions. That's tension. Because let's take an example of a Mercury in Sagittarius and a Mercury in Virgo. Well, with the best will in the world, your Mercury in Sagittarius is not going to focus on detail. And Mercury in Virgo, very much about detail. Mercury in Sagittarius's idea of detail is not the same as Mercury in Virgo's. And just getting that understanding from both parties is, I think, sometimes feels revolutionary when they begin to do that. And that's before, as you say, we begin to put the charts together. Just helping people to see the world through another person's eyes is already massive, which is one of the reasons why I love doing workshops, not even on synastry, but workshops in which we look at a specific area of the chart. Myself, other family members. What does that mean? How do we? And it's absolutely revelatory just doing that.
Yes. And people learn about themselves through the lens of their partner's chart. So if someone, maybe one spouse has Neptune in the 8th house, and their perception is their spouse is terrible with money, terribly flaky and irresponsible financially, and maybe the other person just didn't have that understanding of themselves, how they come across, how they're perceived. So it opens up all kinds of new dimensions in relational understanding.
There's also the matter of intention, because sometimes, and I see this quite a lot, where one party is accusing the other of deliberately being difficult, deliberately doing something to wind me up. They must know, they must know, they must. And actually, it turns out when they start looking at the chart and they say, oh, actually, they really are wired differently. We're not the same in that way. And they're not trying to wind me up. That is such a diffuser of tension the moment when that is realized.
Yes. There's something about getting to know the whole person over the course of time through coming to understand their chart. And so the traits that might attract us at first are, is not the whole situation. There's a lot more to each of us. So it's just as we come to know ourselves more fully in a more rounded way, the chart of the spouse is incredibly helpful to understand who is this person who is a mystery to me in some ways, and to fully appreciate their complexity.
When people begin to understand that there isn't an active intention to thwart each other, then they can begin to see, actually, what I'm asking this person to do is something they genuinely find difficult. And the question is, are they trying to accommodate? And now I've got past this point where I believe that they're being deliberately obstructive or sabotaging. I can see from their point of view that they're actually doing what I'm asking them to do. But I'm saying it's not good enough. And so now, what can I do to support them in their efforts? And vice versa. The other person can say, oh gosh, I didn't realize it was that important. I realized it was important, but I didn't realize it was that important, or why it's important. And so now I'm going to work harder. And it's a beautiful thing to see that happening.
Yeah. Well, I like to say when we're having relationships with other people and, we're committed to them, it's like we have a new chart that, if at least we don't have to fully adopt it as our own, but at least we have to live with it. So I'm a very Neptunian person and I can be a little disorganized. And my wife has a lot of Virgo energy and needs things to be super neat and in place all the time. And instead of getting upset with her that she insists on this orderly way of being, I can see it as a helpful corrective, a lesson for me. So it's like I live more her way, and we get along better. So synastry teaches us how we influence each other if we accept the other person's chart as a part of ourselves, as a part of our domain. And I think the other thing is understanding situational changes and seasons in relationships. So maybe there's a high stress situation. Maybe it goes on a few days, a few weeks. If we understand the transits that are happening, okay, yes, Mars is transiting over your moon. Yes, you're a little cranky for a few days. We can avoid the tendency to just break up when there's a little bit of stress and conflict, or sex desire waxes and wanes. So when it's happening, that's great. And when it's happening less, we can have an acceptance. Hey, the energy is moving differently right now. We don't have to break up, over that. We can flow with cycles of change, cycles of heightened and lessened energy flow between us. So I think that's a very important value of astrology, is having just the wisdom to travel through life together through all kinds of changes. Maybe one person is having a super intense Saturn transit and they're just buried under work. They just have responsibilities. Maybe they can't pay as much attention to you during that time because they have other responsibilities. So instead of feeling unloved and unappreciated, we say, this is what he or she needs to be doing. And everybody gets along better. So astrology to me is an incredible tool for enhanced human relationships. And I try and give a good number of examples of that in my book. Now, this book originally was called Therapeutic Astrology, using the birth chart in psychotherapy and spiritual counseling. So the origin of the book was a discussion of how astrology can be a useful tool in depth therapy to give focus to the counseling process, to identify issues, identify past stages of trauma, and to work with it, to work with the material that emerges. So I remember recently I did a chart for someone who had the sun in the 12th house and Saturn in the 11th house, maybe 10 or 12 degrees away from the sun. And so I innocently asked her right at the beginning of the chart session, do you remember anything when you were about 1 year old when Saturn transited over your sun in the 12th house? Were you hospitalized, or did you feel very alone or abandoned in some way? Was there some 12th house issue that you recall from infancy? And she immediately said, my parents left me with my grandparents and disappeared, and I didn't see them for 2 years. And I didn't know why. And I just remember feeling completely lost and bereft. And she says, that has influenced my entire life, that experience. So that became an immediate topic of conversation in therapy. So the first part of this book was about translating the symbols of astrology into the context of counseling process, how therapists and counselors can use the chart to create very focused process work to identify developmental issues, past stress points, things that need to be revisited. So, as you mentioned earlier, part of the book examines the evolution of a psychological approach to astrology, as opposed to, predicting, will I win the lottery and things of this kind. Not that I have anything against prediction. All astrologers predict. But when you have a psychological lens, you also think about what's happening inside me. It's not all about just what happens to me. It's what do I emanate? What qualities do I express with consciousness? The next part of this book goes deeply into the philosophy of Dane Rudhyar, who developed humanistic and transpersonal astrology, sort of single-handedly raised it up as a philosophy of life, as a path of consciousness evolution. So about 50 pages of the book is devoted to a concise distillation of some of Rudhyar's core ideas. And I think that's really worthwhile for all astrologers. Nowadays, there's been a trend back towards more traditional astrology, and I know it's really valuable to recover our heritage of techniques. And yet, the humanistic style of approaching the chart is still needed and still relevant. So I hope that readers will find this an entry point to reading Rudhyar and discovering him as a kind of spiritual guide, if you will. So that occupies a portion of the book.
I think if we take, I guess, a more holistic approach to understanding of astrology, it means that we don't throw out things that just because we find something new. It means that the two can inform. So we're taking the tradition, which is absolutely vital and important, and the techniques, which are also very useful, obviously. They help us to read the map. But then we're also bringing in our own more modern understanding and bringing in the new planets, which are have more recently been discovered, and thinking about what they're telling us about our consciousness. I've been really excited working with some of the newer planets and what they're showing in a chart. So it's about bringing in the tradition, keeping that tradition, but building on it. And if we can continue to do that, honoring what's always been and welcoming the new, then again, we're working with the energies as they present themselves. It's completely in line with the principle of acceptance, actually, that we're really getting down to, whether it's accepting another person or accepting the transits that are being presented to us, doesn't matter. It's acceptance and working with what you've got in a very positive way.
Well said.
So that's I think the very exciting. I love that we're still discovering new things. I love that we're always bringing new ideas into astrology, discovering older philosophies that are attached to it. And that's what makes it an endlessly exciting and fascinating subject. And I've realized how many times I must have used the word exciting here. So clearly it fires me up. So this is the beauty of it. And it's a whole world of discovery.
Well, what I find fascinating is how we can take astrology out into various fields of life and apply it in our various areas of expertise, whether that's economics or politics or medicine, or in my case, psychology and mental health. So one of the things that I tried to accomplish in this book is looking at astrology and mental health, how astrology enhances our emotional well-being and is a kind of antidepressant in itself. It creates a joyous embrace of life's challenges. And so that's the field of application that I've been exploring the most intensively, hoping that therapists of the future will utilize this tool to get right to the point with people. So counseling is efficient, but also has this underlying spiritual understanding of initiation. Yes?
A lot of therapy is about knowing the questions to ask at the right time. So, when you've got your client in front of you and just helping them to get to an understanding means knowing which questions to ask at what point. And the chart is absolutely brilliant for that, because as you're listening to your client, you're looking at the chart and you're hearing the chart speak through their words. And yet you can see there's something missing in what they're saying. And you can see it in the chart. It's like you've got the crib notes. You can see the answers to this, but it's not your job to tell them. However, you can ask the right question.
Mm.
And the chart helps you to know which questions to ask and how to get that opening up that you need in order for the healing process to begin, to be stimulated. So this is, I don't think actually, I'm just trying to think, are there any areas in life in which astrology is not useful for me? And the answer is maybe cooking. And I have yet to develop, enough knowledge on that score, because I'm sure that there's something out there for me to learn.
Well, what I think is sometimes when the moon is under development, when the moon is being transited, there's a greater motivation to cook. There's a greater interest in nourishing ourselves and our family.
Absolutely. So yes, I use it in gardening. Biodynamics is really important, for gardening and so on. So there are very few areas of life where I don't find the astrology useful. But I think in terms of my work, for the therapist part of me, I would feel blind without it. And I think that's testament to how useful I find it.
it's great to keep our map close at hand through life and guide ourselves through many,
Yeah.
many changes.
So, well, I imagine that most of the audience would be in full agreement with what we've been saying, but I do hope that our conversation has inspired perhaps new perspectives and different uses that had not yet occurred to them. The planet we are discussing is planets in therapy, and I will be putting a link to this on the notes accompanying the podcast. And Greg, if people wanted to learn more about your work, what could they do?
Well, my website is dawnmountain.com, DAWN mountain.com, and that has links to all my books with reviews. And that's probably the best hub of information about my work. I also keep the website gregbogart.net, which is more my website just as a psychotherapist in managed care practice in Northern California. But dawnmountain.com will route you to the publishers and where you can inquire about
Wonderful.
books.
I'll make sure
Thank
that
you.
description box as well. Greg, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Anna, very much. I appreciate being here.
And thank you all for watching. Do remember, if you haven't already, to subscribe. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. I always will get back to you. And if you are interested in learning more about astrology, then you can also check out my website or get in touch with me because I do love teaching it. Until next time, goodbye.